Thank you, Michael, very much, and John, both of you, both the Queensland Council of Civil Liberties and the Crawford Journal, for your very kind invitation for us to come and talk to you this evening. The catalyst for this, the background to this occurring, I guess this event occurring, was that in 2015, Australia 21, which is a not-for-profit policy think tank type organisation that tries to generate debate in regards to issues of importance to Australia that it is considered by Australia 21 board members aren't being properly debated or thoroughly debated, about which question marks still remain. Obviously things like equality and abortion and euthanasia and a whole range of those sorts of issues. Drug reform, of course, has been to the fore in their debating process. And I became involved in Australia 21 through being involved in one of their very first drug reform forums. In 2015, after bouncing it around and watching the way that the stagnant rate of progress, if you like, in terms of movement towards change in illicit drug policy, we considered the idea of getting together a group of 15 to 20 law and law enforcement practitioners in a room for a full one-day round-table discussion to answer the question, on the basis that we can't possibly be happy with the results we're achieving out of our current illicit drug policy, if we were to consider changes, what would they be and how might you go about it? In that room, as part of the participant group, were our other two colleagues here tonight, Professor Desmond Manison and Keith Hamburger, who Michael will introduce in due course. And it was a wonderful day's discussion, I think, which involved law and law enforcement practitioners, judges and former judges, senior corrections people and former senior corrections people, former police commissioners and senior police, former academics such as Desmond himself with law and humanities sort of experience, coalface advocates in the drug reform and drug use sort of interface environment. So the whole idea was to get people who actually dealt with it at the coalface, the practitioners in the field, to say, well, we should have some idea what might work and why we might consider new ways of doing business. If so, what would they be? That led to the report that I see some of you have got that were left at the front table. And that report was launched not long ago in Sydney by Jeff Kennett and Bob Carr. Their involvement in the launch created more media interest than otherwise collectively I think 200 of us could have generated. But as a result of that, it got a fair bit of press and a fair bit of interest, including international press. And I think it was that report and the profile given to it that resulted in an invitation from Michael and John for us to come and talk about what essentially are the findings of that report. I won't try to talk to all of them, but I'll just give you some short background in terms of the issues that I see as fundamental, and particularly from my point of view as a 33-year police professional who spent 20 of those years at the coalface as an operational police officer. Who started off with a pretty hard attitude towards drugs. You play the game, you take the knocks, but very early on you start to realise that some of the impacts of ordinary law enforcement responses to the problems of drug use are pretty clumsy. It's a pretty blunt instrument, and that we often create more harm than good. That became pretty obvious to me pretty early. Then, as Michael said, I did practice at the bar for some 18 months in Queensland down at Southport, simply because I couldn't afford chambers in Brisbane. That was a wonderful experience, but of course, as I had been a policeman previously, I initially intended to get into private practice. People became aware I was a former police officer, and so I found myself defending a lot of people for criminal offences, including a lot of young drug users. To see them facing convictions that might prevent them getting into the job. Some were training to be teachers, some were waiting for admission to the army, some were waiting for admission to police, some were waiting to go on holidays to the United States. All of those things being threatened by a simple conviction for drug possession or drug use started to bring home to you that the punishment far outweighs the crime here, and you wonder whether this should be a crime at all. So that was the start of my journey, and it continued on, and of course since the time the road tied, I've become much more deeply involved in dealing with the drug advocacy issue on the ground. The reality, in my experience, is that despite ever-increasing effectiveness and efficiency of policing, and the fact that there is more cooperation going on now, more collaboration, more intelligence sharing, often driven by the terrorism issue rather than the drug issue, but nevertheless, very efficient policing going on with better use and wider use of telephone intercepts and listening devices and the ability to chase money trails. Despite all of that, despite all the huge seizures of cocaine and heroin and ice and other drugs that we see across the front pages of our newspapers and in TV broadcasts quite frequently. The reality is, and significant arrests to go with that, the reality is we don't make any damn difference. We never reduce supply. Any changes that occur are momentary. They never last. Supply continues unabated. Price doesn't vary. The profits made by the black market, the organised criminal trade, are enormous. And despite all those, the best attempts, if you like, of sometimes quite efficient policing, we're failing miserably. And it's against that mandate, if you like, you have to start saying to yourselves, well, what we've got simply can't be good enough. Standing still can't be an option. And the sort of options that we're considering aren't about going soft on drugs, as a lot of people fear in the community that, you know, this is just giving up on drugs. It's about being smart about drugs. I think it's about recognising that, in a sense, in a broad sense, drug use impacts on three different groups of people. The traffickers, many of whom, the more organised they are, don't use drugs at all. They just make money out of the process. The recreational users, the vast majority of whom hold down good jobs, don't become addicted, perhaps do things that, as a father now, I would rather they don't do, but as young people, they're always going to take risks. We're never going to eradicate drugs out of our community. But to start dealing with them as criminals because of their recreational drug use really is to just aggravate the harms that we're causing. And the third group are the problematic drug users, the people who have got addictions and other problems. In all my experience and interface, I've yet to come across a problematic drug user, an addict or somebody who has a serious problem with illicit and sometimes illicit drugs, who doesn't have underlying problems, either mental illness or schizophrenia or suffering post-traumatic stress, or comes out of a homeless and dysfunctional family environment. The list goes on, but the drug use is almost always a symptom of a deeper malay and a deeper problem. And at the moment, and policing will always be better at this than at the causes, we are dealing with the symptoms. Police is great at dealing with the symptoms. You commit a crime, we can go and lock up the person who commits the crime if we're smart enough to catch them. But we don't dig below the surface to find very often what the causes of the crime were. I just want to leave you with one thought before I hand over to the second speaker. Years ago, as a young detective, I went to a house in the Northern Territory as a result of information we received that two young boys had been seen running away from a corner store from which cartons of pineapple had been stolen. And the person who saw them running away thought she knew who they were. We attended at the house and walked inside to find mum, dad and 5 children sitting around a table, all eating pineapple out of the tins. Pineapple, for those that don't know, having opened the tins were open and people were eating the pineapple. Mum, dad and the 5 children, 7 of them, eating pineapple out of the tins. When we checked the house, the fridge only had pineapple in it, no other food in the house. The cupboards in the room only had pineapple. They'd stolen 2 cartons of a dozen cans of pineapple each, and the only food in the house was pineapple. As young detectives, for us to have arrested them for theft and thought that was the end of the matter would have been an absolute dereliction of duty. They'd stolen food that was totally unsuitable really for the family to eat, but it's all they had, so they were eating it. It was sour apple that needed sugar placed on it and put into an apple pie. That was a symptom of a much deeper cause. Mum and dad were hopeless alcoholics. Dad had a huge gambling problem. They had no money in the house. They had no food. And a 13 and an 11-year-old boy had gone out to steal food to feed the family. And it is very much the same with drug use. Unless we are prepared to look at new ways to deal with the drug problem and realise that so much of drug use is a symptom of a deeper problem, we're never ever going to get very far in dealing with the problems. So we're suggesting it needs to be completely reframed and the drug problem looked at as a health and a social issue, and if you like, a health, social and economic issue, and that there are a range of incremental steps that can be taken, which we'll touch on a little later, that can help us get to a much more worthwhile result, to minimise the damage and the harm that is being caused by people who at the moment are criminalised by their use and possession, are therefore isolated from family and friends, who tell lies to avoid the fact that they have, to admitting that they have committed these sorts of crimes as they now are, to avoid embarrassing mum and dad and the wider family. They tell lies to medical authorities who turn up when somebody collapses, at a rock festival for example, taking a pill because they don't admit they took a pill, pretend they've had food poisoning. The list goes on of examples where we've created an environment of isolation and separation and a lack of engagement that can only ever aggravate the harm. So just with those few words, that's all I'll say at the moment, Michael. I'd like to hand that.